छैन
देखिरहेको छैन देख्यो भने गयो त
त्यो अर्कै खोलिरहेछ माइक्रोसफ्ट बिङ
एकैछिन है त के खोल्यो त posterior horn, and if in the thoracolumbar region it also has got its lateral horn or intermediate horn. ठीक छ? So ventral horn, dorsal horn and intermediate horn भयो. Further, this ventral horn, dorsal horn divides the peripheral gray matter of the spinal cord into three regions. On each half of the spinal cord, this ventral horn and dorsal horn of the gray matter of spinal cord divides this peripheral white matter into posterior white column, okay, lateral white column, and anterior white column. This thing you already have studied. Like anterior white column, which is also known as anterior funiculus, lateral white column or lateral funiculus, posterior white column or posterior funiculus. Okay. So while we are concerned about the key form, I put the mic on for you. So these white columns, within these three different regions of white column, the both ascending and descending tract of spinal cord are dispersed within this white column like this. Okay, your anterior white column, lateral white column, and posterior white column. We can see numbers of ascending and descending tract dispersed within. Okay, so these are the tract which we are going to study now. So let's enter the topic. And again, before entering the topic, we are familiar with the terminology like contralateral representation of the body. We know that right half of the cerebral hemisphere control the left half of the body, and left half control the right half of the body, isn't it? So such type of representation or such crisscross type of representation is known as contralateral representation. Okay. So, and with this thing in mind, with this concept that our body has contralateral controlling system, we should be familiar with some of the terminologies like contralateral, which mean opposite side of the body. Okay, contralateral. This right limb is right upper limb is contralateral to the left lower limb, isn't it? Like that is the contralateral. Ipsilateral, that is same side of the body. For example, right upper limb and right lower limb, they are ipsilateral. And decussation is the terminology used in the nervous system for representing the crossing of the site where there is crossing of the nerve fibers. Okay, so decussation is crossing, ipsilateral, same side of the body, contralateral, opposite side of the body. And remember about this contralateral representation of the body. Then we'll go into the topic, which is tracts of spinal cord. Okay, so actually to define the tracts of spinal cord, or just to have general concept about the tracts of spinal cord, tracts are simply a collections of nerve fibers. Okay, tracts are collections of nerve fibers connecting two masses of gray matter. Okay, till now you should be clear about what is gray matter and what is white matter. What is gray matter? We have been talking like spinal cord has central gray matter, peripheral white matter. So what actually is this gray and white matter? What do you know about
Gray
this?
matters are
Yes,
gray
gray matter.
matters are collection of cell bodies of neuron.
Okay, and
White matters are collection of axons of neuron.
okay, collections of axons are white matter, or collections of nerves forms the white matter, and collections of cell body forms the gray matter within the central nervous system. Okay, you are right. So tracts are simply collections of nerve fibers, or let's say a collections of axons. Please wait a minute. अर्को एउटा कन्सेप्ट के चाहिन्छ? Ascending tract mediates both conscious and unconscious sensation. Okay, a conscious sensation which carries sensation like pain, temperature, touch, proprioception. These are the conscious sensation. Okay, and the conscious center or this conscious sensation are carried up to the cerebral cortex, which is known as conscious level or proprioception to a conscious level. While unconscious sensation, like unconsciously also we maintain our posture. Okay, unconsciously also we maintain our balance. So such type of unconscious sensation, which is carried by the stretch receptors of the muscles, is carried up to the cerebellum, which is known as subconscious center, and cerebrum is known as the conscious center of the controlling mechanism. Okay, so ascending tract mediate both this conscious unconscious sensation to either cerebrum or cerebellum. Okay, then here this ascending tract, which is also known as afferent tract, So afferent tract or ascending tract carries sensation from different types of sense organ. Okay, so this different type of sensation from sensory organ are carried with the help of this ascending tract to the higher center, which might be cerebral cortex or cerebellum. Okay, so here we can see two fibers, two types of ascending fibers ascending here. So one of the sensation is carried here by these fibers. Okay, and it ascend straight up to the spinal cord, and they get decussate only at the higher level or at the upper end of the medulla oblongata to reach the opposite half of the cerebral cortex. While the next type of fibers ascend here by crossing at the same level of the spinal cord and ascend up to the right cerebral hemisphere. So anyhow, the decussation may either be at the level of spinal cord only or at the level of brainstem. Okay, the crossing occurs there, and the representation will be contralateral with the body, and the contralateral representation of body with the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so this ascending tract which carry the sensation is also known as afferent tract or ascending tract. And with this ascending tract, we should be clear that there are series of neurons. There are first, second, and third order neuron which carries the sensation. So the first order neuron is usually present in the dorsal root ganglion of the spinal cord. So you must have heard about the terminology dorsal root ganglion, isn't it? Which is present at the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, isn't it? Spinal nerve has got ventral root and dorsal root. So within dorsal root, there is a collections of nerve fibers which is known as ganglion. So collections of cell body within the central nervous system is known as gray matter, while collections of cell bodies outside the central nervous system is known as ganglion. So one of the examples of this ganglion is here dorsal root ganglion, which is present within the posterior root of the spinal nerve. Okay, so this is dorsal horn. With the first order neuron having pseudo-unipolar neuron, so the peripheral process carries the sensation, okay, from the different sense organ, while central process relays into the central nervous system, that is the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. This is the central process of the pseudo-unipolar neuron, and this is the peripheral process of the pseudo-unipolar neuron. So this forms the first order neuron within the ascending tract. Then after, the first order neuron relays within the second order neuron, which is present at the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So this is second order neuron. Okay, this one is first order neuron, this one is second order neuron, and the second order neuron cross within the spinal cord or even. Please turn off your mic. Okay, second order neuron ascend up to the thalamus, where there is the presence of third order neuron. Okay, so third order neuron present in thalamus, then finally relays into the cerebral cortex. Clear? So this series of first, second, and third order neuron are arranged in this way within the ascending tract. Almost all ascending tract has got this first, second, and third order neuron, with very few exceptions. Once again, so previously we have seen that this type of ascending tract crosses or decussate at the level of spinal segment where it is arising, isn't it? It is decussating right at the level of spinal cord. While the next type of this is also the ascending fibers having first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. But here in this case, what is the difference from this previous one is, see here it is decussating at the spinal level, while this is decussating at the upper part of the medulla oblongata. Okay, so most of the ascending fibers cross at the upper part of medulla oblongata, and this type of crossing within the upper part of medulla oblongata is known as sensory decussation. So remember this terminology, sensory decussation, while motor decussation or this descending tract also decussate at the lower end of the medulla, forming motor decussation, while upper part of the medulla, this sensory nerve or ascending fibers cross, forming the sensory decussation. Okay, are you people getting my point still here? Are you people there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if any confusion, you can ask me. Okay, so I hope till now you are clear. Now then we'll go for the ascending tract, and this ascending tract are broadly divided mainly into three pathway system. Okay, one is posterior column pathway, which is present within the posterior white column. Then anterior and posterior spinocerebellar pathway, which is present within this ventrolateral part of the white column, and spinothalamic pathway, which is also present within this anterior anterior and lateral part of the wide column. Okay, the posterior column pathway is mainly responsible to carry proprioceptive sensation, while spinocerebellar pathway is responsible to carry reflex proprioceptive sensation, and spinothalamic pathway is responsible to carry exteroceptive sensation. Okay, so we'll be dealing individually with this thing. Now let's start with the dorsal column pathway, which is also known as posterior column pathway. Okay, so this dorsal column or posterior, it is known as dorsal column or posterior column because it is present within the posterior wide column. Okay, so it is known as dorsal or posterior column, and the receptors here in this dorsal column pathway perceive different type of sensation, mainly proprioceptive sensation like fine touch, which means not crude type, or fine touch which can discriminate exactly the location of the touched area. Okay, so discriminative touch or fine touch, then pressure, vibration, conscious proprioception, and stereognosis. Stereognosis means when we close our eye and somebody puts some familiar object in our hand, we can easily identify that thing, isn't it? Suppose we are closing our eye and someone put a pen, we can easily identify without looking even without looking at that thing, we can identify that object, isn't it? So such type of sensation is known as stereognosis, and this stereognosis is carried by this dorsal column pathway. Okay, so these are the sensation carried by receptors within the dorsal column pathway. And this first order neuron, peripheral process of first order neuron carry this sensation, and the central process ascend up in the form of fasciculus gracilis, which is also known as tract of Gall, and fasciculus cuneatus, which is also known as tract of Brodach. Okay, here tract of Gall and tract of Brodach ascend actually this central process of first order neuron itself forms this fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Okay, so this central process of first order neuron finally relay within the nuclei of second order neuron, which is present at the upper end of medulla oblongata, which are nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. Fasciculus gracilis relay into nucleus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus relays into nucleus cuneatus. Okay, this is about the first order neuron. Then this nuclei are second order neuron. Now from this second order neuron, this fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis now cross it on the opposite side. Okay, right side and left side fasciculus cuneatus gracilis cross with each other. Now after crossing, this is no more known as dorsal column pathway or no more known as fasciculus gracilis cuneatus. Now it is known as medial lemniscus system, which ascend up to the thalamus. Okay, so first order neuron, this is represented by this red color. This black color, which forms the medial lemniscus system, is representing the second order neuron. And finally, the nuclei present within the thalamus forms the third order neuron that relays into the cortex of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so first order, second order, and third order neuron, which forms the dorsal column pathway. Okay, clear about this thing? Are you following me? Are you people?
Ma'am, repeat
Yes,
garden
ma'am.
for you.
Repeat gardening.
Azun.
Okay lah. Hey, here we are talking about dorsal column pathway. इसको sensation त बुझ्यो हैन. These are the sensation carried by dorsal column pathway. Now, usually what we have mentioned earlier is first order neuron. यहाँ के difference छ त भन्दाखेरि see here. एकैछिन यसमा हेरौँ. First order neuron has peripheral process and central process. Peripheral process carries or perceive different sensation, and central process relay those sensation into the nuclei which is present within the spinal cord. That is second order neuron. तर यसमा के difference छ? यो central process, it doesn't relay directly into the spinal cord, but it ascend up to the medulla oblongata. So this dorsal column pathway, second order neuron is present only at medulla oblongata, not like in other ascending fibers. It is not present in this spinal cord itself. Okay, second order neuron are present only in medulla oblongata in case of dorsal column pathway. So this fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis forms the first order neuron. So some further detail about fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus is this fasciculus gracilis is longest one, which begins right from the sensation is carried right from the toe up to the cerebral cortex. Okay, but fasciculus cuneatus carries sensation only from the upper thoracic region and upper limb. Okay, but from the lower limb of even right from the toe, the sensation is carried from this fasciculus gracilis. So fasciculus gracilis begin right from the lower limb, while fasciculus cuneatus, its segment is in the upper thoracic and cervical region only. Okay, and both of these fasciculus forms the or they are formed by the central process of first order neuron. Okay, while second order neuron is present within the nucleus or second order neuron is formed by nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus present in the medulla oblongata, which ascend up to the thalamus where third order neuron is present, and this third order neuron presents or relay into the nuclei present within the cerebral cortex. Clear? And remember, this decussation occurs only at the level of medulla oblongata. Okay, here right. Suppose here this is the right leg. Sensation from right leg is carried up to the right half of the medulla oblongata. Crossing occurs at the medulla oblongata, forming sensory decussation, and ascend up to the left hemisphere of the cerebrum. Okay, so are you clear? And remember, this fasciculus gracilis is present medial to fasciculus cuneatus. Okay, so I hope you people are clear about this dorsal column. So this is all about the dorsal column we should know. So some clinical correlation regarding this dorsal column is when lesion occurs, so below the level of lesion, ipsilateral loss of all this conscious proprioception, fine tones and vibration, whatever sensation is carried by this dorsal column, ipsilateral loss occurs because we know crossing occurs only at the higher level, that is at the level of medulla oblongata. So below the lesion, the loss of sensation will be ipsilateral. Okay. And then in case of this individual having a lesion or compression within this dorsal column, he or she shows one sign known as Romberg sign. Okay, so what actually this Romberg sign is, when a patient is asked to stand straight with feet closed together and eyes closed, okay, what I mean, the person may fall down because of loss of this proprioceptive sensation. Like proprioceptive sensation which carry the spatial relation within this 3D space. Okay, so that proprioception will be lost. Because of that, whenever the individual closes his eye with closed feet, he or she will lose his balance and he or she may fall down. So such sign is known as Romberg sign, and that individual will have positive Romberg sign. Okay, this is about the dorsal column pathway. So shall we move to the another pathway? So let's go for the spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tract, which is located at the lateral and ventral to ventral horn. So here we can see the central canal of the spinal cord, which is surrounded by this adhesive gray matter. This is ventral horn, this is dorsal horn, isn't it? So this spinothalamic tract is present ventral and lateral to this ventral horn of the spinal cord. Okay. Lateral spinothalamic tract carries mainly the pain and temperature sensation, while anterior spinothalamic tract carries crude touch and pressure. Fine touch is carried by dorsal column pathway, while crude touch, which cannot discriminate the 2 point of touched area. Okay, such type of touch or simple rough type of touch is known as crude touch. So crude touch and pressure is carried by this anterior spinothalamic tract. And in brainstem, like the dorsal column pathway, when it crosses with each other and ascend up the brainstem, it is known as medial lemniscus. Similarly, spinothalamic tract above the level of brainstem, it combined with the spinotectal tract to form the spinal lemniscus. So what is this lemniscus system? We also should have idea. Okay, medial lemniscus is simply the crossed fibers of dorsal column pathway, and spinal lemniscus is the higher part of the spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tract, when it ascend even higher up to the brainstem and it combined with spinotectal tract, it is now known as spinal lemniscus. Okay. Then let's go in detail about the lateral spinothalamic tract. Now, lateral spinothalamic tract, which is present at the lateral part of ventral horn of spinal cord. This is lateral spinothalamic tract and this is anterior spinothalamic tract. Okay, so lateral spinothalamic tract is particularly designed for pain and temperature sensation. It carries particularly pain and temperature sensation. Okay, and this lateral spinothalamic tract, also being an ascending tract, okay, it also has got first, second and third order neuron. So first order neuron terminates in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Okay, then second order neuron is present within the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Second order neuron decussate within one segment of origin and terminating the thalamus. Now second order neuron decussate within the same segment of the spinal cord, okay, and it ascend up to the thalamus where third order neuron is present. So in thalamus, the third order neuron then finally projects to the cerebral cortex. Let's say simply somatosensory cortex. That will be more clear when you study about the cerebrum. For now, let's remember cerebral cortex. Okay. First order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. Then one important thing you should remember, main difference you should remember between this lateral spinothalamic tract and ventral spinothalamic tract is, see here, lateral spinothalamic tract decussate right at the same spinal segment. Okay, suppose here this is 10 thoracic spinal segment, and this decussation is occurring right at the 10 thoracic spinal segment. But unlike here in anterior spinothalamic tract, the sensation carried here is crude touch and pressure. Beside this, tickling sensation and itching sensation is also carried by this, supposed to carried by this anterior spinothalamic tract. First order neuron terminates in dorsal horn like the lateral spinothalamic tract. Then second order neuron decussate may ascend several spinal segments. Like in case of lateral spinothalamic tract, the decussation was right at the same spinal segment. Okay, but here this decussation occurs continuously and it also ascends subsequently. So few spinal segment it will be crossed. It will be taking this few spinal segment to complete the crossing or to complete the decussation. Are you clear about this point? Once again, I repeat, here in same spinal segment, this crossing is occurring from, let's say, from left to right or right to left, vice versa. Okay, within the same segment, this crossing is occurring in case of lateral spinothalamic tract, but in case of anterior spinothalamic tract, the crossing takes some few spinal segments higher, and then it ascends up to the thalamus where there is the presence of third order neuron. This is the second order neuron. This will be the first order neuron, second order neuron, and thalamus will constitute the third order neuron. So same thing is the third order neuron projects to the somatosensory cortex, that is cerebral cortex. Okay, this is about the lateral and anterior spinothalamic tract. So just to be clear, this is the first order neuron, which is represented by this reddish color. Okay, yellow color represents the second order neuron, which relate to the thalamus, where there is the presence of third order neuron, and this third order neuron relates to the cerebral cortex. Lateral spinothalamic tract is particularly for the pain and temperature, and anterior spinothalamic tract is particularly for the crude touch and pressure sensation. Clear? Clear? Are you people there?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, so shall I proceed?
You can proceed, ma'am.
Okay, then some clinical aspect of this spinothalamic tract. Okay, so in case of lesion within the lateral spinothalamic tract, what happened? The level below the area below the lesion, there will be contralateral loss of pain and temperature, because here what happened, right at the level of spinal cord crossing occurs. Okay, so the loss of pain and temperature will be contralateral. But there is another one interesting and rare disease known as syringomyelia. So what happened in this condition is, this is actually a rare disease where what happened, a fluid-filled cyst will develop within the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, and this disease is most usually found within the cervical region of the spinal cord. So what happened, when there is a fluid-filled space present within the central canal, it will compress the crossing spinothalamic tract, isn't it? When central canal expand because of the fluid, it mainly project ventrally, compressing the crossed lateral spinothalamic tract. Okay, and this results in, because both side spinothalamic tract will be affected, this results in bilateral loss of pain and temperature sensation. Okay, both side pain and temperature sensation will be lost, and then it will sphere touch sensation, because that touch and pressure is also carried by this. Now we are going to study about spinocerebellar tract. Okay, it will sphere touch sensation, but loss of pain and temperature sensation will be there. This is about the clinical aspect related to the lateral spinothalamic tract. Then we'll go for the spinocerebellar tract. Remember, this name itself are suggesting the tract, which we already have defined. Tracts are simply a collection of nerve fibers which connect two masses of gray matter within the spinal cord. within the central nervous system, isn't it? So, and these tracts are named simply by looking at the gray matter connected by them. Suppose spinocerebellar, which is connecting nuclei of spinal cord with the nuclei of cerebellum. Here, spinothalamic, connecting nuclei of spinal cord with the nuclei of thalamus, isn't it? Likewise, the posterior column pathway also, but in that condition it is slightly different because it is present at the posteriormost aspect of the spinal cord. It is known as dorsal column pathway. Otherwise, almost all ascending and descending tracts are named after the gray matter connected by them. Okay, so then we'll go for the spinocerebellar tract. Now, the spinocerebellar tract is located dorsolateral and ventrolateral part of the spinal cord. So it is present within the lateral white column, let's say, for convenience, or it will be more easier for us to remember. The spinocerebellar tract is present at the lateral white column. Okay, and it consists of sequence of only two neurons. Okay, like in previous ascending tract where we have studied about dorsal column pathway, spinothalamic pathway, there were three other neuron, isn't it? First order, second order, and third order neuron. But one exception to that, here in case of spinocerebellar trackway, it has only got two sequence of neuron, first and second order neuron also, neuron only, because the nerve here in this case is not going to rely on thalamus. It directly enters into the cerebellum, so there are only two sequence of neuron. And sensation from the spinocerebellar tract carries sensation from muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ to cerebellum for unconscious proprioception. Like previously also we have mentioned, unconscious sensation is mediated to the cerebellum, while conscious sensation is mediated to the cerebral cortex. Okay, so let's go in detail about this spinocerebellar tract. There are also two types of spinocerebellar tract: anterior or ventral spinocerebellar tract and dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Okay, so this anterior spinocerebellar tract here, first order neuron is present in dorsal root ganglion of spinal segment, lumbar and sacral spinal segment. Okay, in the lower part of the spinal cord, this first order neuron are present here, while second order neuron of this anterior spinocerebellar tract is present in nucleus dorsalis of Clark in L2S3 segment, same segment. Okay, so this nucleus dorsalis of Clark, have you studied about the Rex layer of spinal cord? At least you must have heard about this Rex layer, isn't it? There are lamina 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 around the central canal, isn't it? Within the dorsal horn, it is divided into 10 different lamina, and the 10th one is present around the central canal of the spinal cord. So similarly, here this nucleus dorsalis of Clark is present at the base of, here almost at the base of this dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Okay, so second order neuron is present within the base of the dorsal horn of the spinal cord at L2S3 segment. So first order neuron, second order neuron. And via the superior cerebral peduncle, it is related to the ipsilateral cerebral hemisphere. And another thing here is, so see here, this spinocerebellar tract carries sensation from either from Golgi tendon organ, isn't it, or stretch receptor here. So from Golgi tendon organ, it is carrying this peripheral process of dorsal root ganglion is carrying the sensation from Golgi tendon organ of lower limb. Here, this is the left side of the left lower limb, let's say. Then the central process is related to the second order neuron, which is present within the base of the dorsal horn of spinal cord, isn't it? This is the nucleus dorsal column, or Clark's column. Here now, this nerve fiber, second order neuron, cross within the same spinal segment, then it ascend up within at the presenting itself at the lateral white column. Okay, when it ascend up to the midbrain, when it ascend up to the pons and even up to the midbrain, now above the midbrain, it again recross. Here, one crossing is already here, and at the level of midbrain, again it is recrossing with each recrossing the midline. Okay, to enter inside the, again in the left cerebellar hemisphere. It is carrying the sensation from the left lower limb, and it is related to the left cerebellar hemisphere by crossing 2 times the midline. So it represents the ipsilateral cerebral hemisphere. While superior cerebellar peduncle, it enters to the cerebellum to represent the ipsilateral cerebral hemisphere. Okay, Unlike the cerebral cortex, which is representing or which is controlling the opposite half of the body, this cerebellum is controlling the same half of the body. Left cerebellar hemisphere is controlling the left lower limb. Right cerebellar hemisphere is controlling the right lower limb. So, the function of this anterior spinocerebellar tract is it controls coordinated movement and posture from lower limb and lower part of the body trunk. Okay, lower limb and lower part of the body trunk. The coordinated movement or the fine movement, skill movement is carried by this anterior spinocerebellar tract. Then we'll go for the posterior spinocerebellar tract, which is present only above the third lumbar spinal segment. Okay, it is present only above third lumbar spinal segment, and here the fiber do not cross to the opposite side. Here, let's see here, this blue color is representing the anterior or ventral spinocerebellar tract, where it is crossing at the level of spinal cord, it ascends up, and again it crosses to reach the same side of the cerebellar hemisphere. But the next one, posterior spinocerebellar or dorsal spinocerebellar tract, here what happened? The sensation is carried here, okay, by the even from the either from the Golgi tendon or muscle spindle. This is peripheral process of pseudounipolar neuron. Central process, it relates to the second order neuron. Okay, here this is first order neuron and it relates to the second order neuron. Now, this second order neuron doesn't cross at this level of spinal cord, but it ascends ipsilaterally. It is an up same at the same side. Okay, then through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, it reaches the same side cerebellar hemisphere. So remember, this spinocerebellar tract, both ventral and dorsal spinocerebellar tract, has ipsilateral presentation. Okay, first order neuron is present at C8 to L3. Second order neuron is also above L3 and below C8. Let's say C8 to L3. Second order neuron, which is present at the dorsalis of Clark or Clark's column. This is also known as Clark's column. Then why inferior cerebral? Previously, anterior spinocerebellar tract enters the cerebellum through the superior cerebellar peduncle. Here, posterior spinocerebellar tract enters the cerebellum via the inferior cerebellar peduncle to ipsilateral cerebral hemisphere. Okay, and this carries unconscious proprioceptive sensation from lower limb and lower part of the body trunk. Okay, so unconscious proprioceptive sensation from lower limb and lower part of the body trunk is carried by posterior spinocerebellar tract. So what about the unconscious proprioceptive sensation from the upper limb and upper half of the body? It is carried by a separate tract which is known as cuneo-cerebellar tract. Okay, actually it is equivalent to this posterior spinocerebellar tract only, but the thing is it carries unconscious proprioceptive sensation from upper limb and upper part of the body trunk, this cuneo-cerebellar tract. So first order neuron is present at the dorsal root ganglion C2 to C8. Previously it was L3 C8 to L3. Okay, posterior spinocerebellar tract carries sensation from C8 to L3, while it carries sensation from C2 to C8 spinal segment. Second order neuron is present at is associated cuneate nucleus, which is present at medulla oblongata. Okay, and via the here it also enters the cerebellum via the inferior cerebellar peduncle to ipsilateral cerebellar hemisphere. So it carries unconscious proprioceptive sensation from upper limb and upper part of the body. Okay. So the main three ascending pathway system we already have studied, which are dorsal column pathway, which consists of fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Then spinocerebellar pathway, which consists of ventral and dorsal spinocerebellar tract, and also the another extra one is cuneo-cerebellar tract. And then the third system is spinothalamic tract, which consists of ventral and lateral spinothalamic tract. Lateral and ventral spinothalamic tract. Do you remember lateral spinothalamic tract is for? What is the sensation carried by lateral spinothalamic tract? Sensation carried by lateral spinothalamic tract is
Pain and
Pain and
temperature.
temperature.
pain and temperature. What about the ventral spinothalamic tract?
Crude touch and pressure.
Crude torch and pressure. Okay. So then, beside these main three pathway ascending pathway system, some other ascending tracts are spinotectal tract. Okay, spinotectal tract along with the spinothalamic tract form the spinal lemniscus, which we have mentioned earlier also. Okay, so this spinotectal tract is responsible for spinovisual reflex, like the coordinated movement of head and eyes. When we view something that fascinates us, okay, we look through our eye and our head move in coordinated fashion. So this movement is possible because of this spinotectal tract. Okay, coordinated movement of these eyes and head in response to some stimulus which fascinates us mainly. Okay, then next is the spino-reticular tract. So offerent from reticular formation, as we have already mentioned, this spino-reticular. So name itself is suggesting it connects the nuclei of spinal cord with the reticular formation. Spinotectal nuclei of spinal cord with the tectal nucleus. Spino-olivary nuclei of spinal cord with the olivary nucleus. Okay. So spino-reticular carries offerent from reticular formation, and this pathway is mainly responsible for level of consciousness. Like in awake condition, these spinal-reticular tracts are responsible for this level of consciousness. Spino-olivary tract are responsible for information to provide information to cerebellum from proprioceptive organs. Okay, so these proprioceptive organs, which include this Golgi tendon organ, muscle spindles that maintains the posture, that maintains the body sensation within these spatial organization. The spino-olivary tract is responsible for that. Okay, so these are the other ascending tract beside those three main ascending pathway system. Okay? Then it's better to know something about the lemniscus system. So this term lemniscus is used for some ascending nerve tract or ascending tract in the upper part of the medulla pons and midbrain, or let's say in the upper part of the brainstem. So this spinal lemniscus is simply combination of spinothalamic tract and spinotectal tract. Okay, the spinothalamic tract above the level of brainstem, when combines with spinotectal tract, it forms the spinal lemniscus. Medial lemniscus is the crossed posterior column fiber, isn't it? Above the level of medulla oblongata, when this dorsal column pathway cross with each other, now it is known as medial lemniscus system. And then lateral lemniscus system. Lateral lemniscus is simply the third order neuron of auditory pathway. Like the hearing pathway, when we study about the hearing pathway, the third order neuron of hearing pathway is known as, or it constitutes the lateral lemniscus system. So these are some of the lemniscus system that we should know, and this thing is very important when we study about the cross section of brainstem. Now maybe after the completion of these tracks, you will be studying about the brainstem, and we should study about the cross section of brainstem at different level, and these terminologies you will encounter in that part. So you should be clear about this spinal lemniscus, medial lemniscus, and lateral lemniscus, and obviously all this ascending and descending tract. Because these things will be studying, we have to locate the particular location of this ascending descending tract within the cross section through the brainstem and spine. Okay. So this is all about the ascending tract. About the descending tract, I think we will study it in next lecture. So within this part, anything do I need to repeat? Any confusion? Just to recall, we have studied about the ascending tract system, and this ascending tract are mainly divided into three pathway: posterior column pathway, spinocerebellar pathway, and spinothalamic pathway. This posterior column pathway, which is also known as dorsal column pathway, constitute the fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, which is present within the posterior white column. So the medial one is the fasciculus gracilis, lateral one is the fasciculus cuneatus. Okay, fasciculus cuneatus carries sensation from the upper part of the body, while fasciculus gracilis carries the sensation from the lower part of the body, even from the lower part of the body. Okay, and the sensation carried by this posterior column pathway is mainly the proprioceptive sensation, like crude, these fine thoughts, vibration, proprioception, stereognosis, all of these are carried by this posterior column pathway. While spinocerebellar pathway, which constitute anterior and posterior spinocerebellar pathway, it is concerned with this unconscious proprioception. Okay, and one exception with this posterior column and spinothalamic pathway above this spinocerebellar pathway is it has got only two order neuron, first order and second order neuron, because the fibers here relay directly into the ipsilateral side of the cerebellar hemisphere. But here both in case of posterior column and spinothalamic pathway, first, second, and third order neuron are there, and the final release station is at the cerebral cortex, isn't it? And regarding this spinothalamic pathway, the spinothalamic pathway, which is also divided into anterior and lateral spinothalamic pathway, it is responsible for exteroceptive sensation like pain, temperature, touch, and pressure. Okay, so pain temperature is carried by this lateral spinothalamic pathway, and torque and pressure is carried by this ventral spinothalamic pathway. Okay, so this is what we have studied all about in today's lecture. So any part do I need to repeat? Otherwise, we are done for today. For next class, we'll be in next class we'll be studying about the descending tract, and then after you will be studying about the brainstem. Remember about the sensory decussation, where in the upper part of the medulla, the ascending fibers cross forming the sensory decussation, while in the lower part of the medulla, the motor descending fibers cross forming the motor decussation. Okay, sensory decussation is present at the upper part of medulla oblongata. Motor decussation is present at the lower part of the medulla oblongata. So, any part do I need to repeat further? Okay.
म्याम
Yes.
यो कुन सिचुएसनमा चाहिँ इप्सिलेटरल लस अफ सेन्सेसन अनि कुन सिचुएसनमा चाहिँ त्यो कन्ट्रालेटरल लस अफ सेन्सेसन भयो त्यो चाहिँ कति
त्यसको लागि फर्स्ट वी शुड बी क्लियर अबाउट दि ट्र्याक्स. ओके, अब असेन्डिङ ट्र्याकको जुन छ नि त्यसमा क्रसिङ कुन लेभलमा भएको छ. अब क्रसिङ हुनभन्दा अगाडि लस भएको छ भए त्यसले सेम साइडमा लस हुने देखायो होइन. क्रसिङ भइसकेको लेभलमा लिजन भएको छ भए चाहिँ उसले एप्सिल्याटरल साइडमा हुने भयो होइन. त्यही भएर यसको लागि चाहिँ तिमीहरू ट्र्याक्सहरू पढ्नु कुन कहाँ लेभलमा क्रस हुन्छ. अनि त्यो क्रसिङ साइड थाहा भएपछि हामीले अब क्रसिङ हुनभन्दा तल लिजन भएको छ भए त के हुने भयो त इप्सिल्याटरलमा हुने भयो नि त होइन. अब सपोज मेडुलाको लेभलमा क्रसिङ भएको छ एन्ड देन थोरेसिक सेगमेन्ट अफ स्पाइनल कर्डमा लिजन भयो भने त्यहाँ अब कुन साइडको लस हुने भयो त. क्रसिङ भइसकेको छैन भनेपछि त सेम साइडको लस हुने भयो नि होइन. क्रसिङ भइसकेको छ भए क्रसिङभन्दा अबभको लेभलमा भयो भने चाहिँ कन्ट्राल्याटरल लस हुने भयो. त्यो एकचोटि हेर्नु अनि कन्फ्युजन.
थ्याङ्क यू म्याम.
Any other question? Okay, so you go through your textbook. The confusion however, we have got our next lecture where we'll be studying about the descending tract. होइन अन्तिमहरु चाहिँ यो picture छ नि. So in exam also it may be asked, you should draw the transverse section of spinal cord and you have to locate different ascending and descending tract within that. है यो चाहिँ प्र्याक्टिस गर्दै गर्नु. पछि डिसेन्डिङ ट्र्याक बनाउनको लागि पनि सजिलो हुन्छ. असेन्डिङ ट्र्याक हामीले पढिसकिहाल्यौँ, यसको लोकेसन चाहिँ थाहा हुनुपर्छ. ओके, you should try to draw this picture, not only this ascending track. एक साइडमा डिसेन्डिङ ट्र्याक गर्नु, अर्को साइडमा असेन्डिङ ट्र्याक गर्नु, जसरी यो पिक्चरमा देखाएको छ. You draw the transverse section through the यसरी 3D नै चाहिँदैन, सिम्पली एउटा 2 डाइमेन्सनल डायग्राम बनाए हुन्छ है. वान साइडमा असेन्डिङ ट्र्याक, अर्को हाफमा डिसेन्डिङ ट्र्याक गरेर यो डायग्राम गरेर चाहिँ प्र्याक्टिस गर्नु. It will be easier for you people to remember what is the exact location of this track. Ascending descending track location भयो. प्लस अनि एक्जाममा पनि कहिलेकाहीँ यो ड्र गर्नलाई सोधेर आउँछ. Okay, so I think we are done for today. Thank you for your attention.